Every day, your City of Tempe staff goes above and beyond to make sure our community gets the best possible services and the most for our tax dollars. But how good is good? How do you measure it? And how do we know what we really need to make progress on some of our most pressing issues? To guide us, we developed a series of goals designed to help us improve our community based on our Tempe City Council's 5 strategic priorities. Reaching for excellence, we are comparing ourselves against the rest of the nation as well as ourselves. Some of our goals will help save lives. Some of them will help us save money. All of them will help us make Tempe a better place. Tempe Accelerates is an opportunity for you to get involved. Hear what city staff and community partners are doing to reach our goals. Your role? You are a vital part of our community. Share your ideas and help us craft better solutions. Ask questions. Be part of the conversation either in person or online. Check tempe.gov/Tempe Accelerates for dates and times of our next programs and collaborate with us at Tempe City Hall. Today, we will hyper-focus on 2 performance measures. Each presenting team will have 10 minutes to share data, strategies, and progress on a performance measure. Then, you will have about 10 minutes to ask questions or offer suggestions and ideas. On the back of your agenda, we have resource questions to help you participate in the conversation. Also included with your agenda is a quick survey with space you can use to include any ideas or suggestions you might have about today's topics. Thank you for participating. Now, let's accelerate.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another session of Tempe Accelerates. We gather on a periodic basis to hear from the various teams around the City of Tempe organization who are working on performance measures, and this is an opportunity for them to present on the measures that they're working on, and for all of you here to provide input and feedback and to weigh in on their strategies for achieving those measures. There will be 2 presented today by the same team who is sitting here to my right, and that will be on Performance Measure 2.10, Budget Award, Building a Transparent and Understandable Budget, as well as Performance Measure 5.10, Revenue Forecast, Building a Sound Financial Plan. So at the conclusion of each of those measures, the presentation on each of them, there will be an opportunity for questions. And then as well, if you are not going to be asking a question or think of something after the fact, there are forms that should be available to all of you to give written feedback to the teams as well. So we encourage your participation and thank you for being here this afternoon. Without further ado, Mark, take it away.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Mark Day, the Municipal Budget Director, and I'd like to introduce the rest of the budget staff that's here today. So to my right is Lori Vickers. She's an analyst with the Budget Office. We also have Susanna Snyder and Tim McGowan and Benicia Benson, and then Lucas Stykowski. So, big round of applause. So this first presentation, it will be just me speaking. So Lori is my emotional support analyst for this one. So if you wonder why she's not saying anything. Okay, so the first one is 2.10. Performance measure, receive the Government Finance Officers Association, or GFOA, Distinguished Budget Presentation Award annually for being high quality, accessible, and understandable. So when the Strategic Management and Diversity Office asked us to present at this presentation, I immediately went to section priority number 5, financial stability and vitality. Oh, it's about budget. But lo and behold, I forgot it's under strong community connections. And the reason for that is that in order to develop trust and credibility with the residents in the city budget and the city budget process is through transparency. And one of the main ways we can do that is through our annual budget document. Okay, so a little bit about GFOA. So it was founded in 1906, and as you can, it's quoted up there, the purpose is to promote excellence in state and local government financial management. So if we followed the state statute to publish our annual budget document, it'd be about 8 pages, and we would satisfy the requirements. But we're obviously striving for a higher standard and for excellence, and we want to put best practices in place and do the best job possible, and that's why we're striving for this award. So this organization represents public financial officials, and there's over 20,000 members. So as far as how we're doing with this measure, so the baseline was taken in 2015-16 when this performance measure was adopted. So we've achieved this award annually for 32 consecutive years. And so when I became budget director, I thought the one thing that would make me lose sleep is if we lost this award. So it's one thing that's not going to happen. So you can see that the award up there is for 2018-19. So I know we're in the 1920 budget cycle, but we just submitted that document, and it takes about them 6 to 8 months to go through the process of reviewing your document. So, okay, so this is what it actually looks like. I won't read this to you today. 452 pages. But the document is available for our residents as well as employees. So it's on the public site as well as our internal site. And I'm going to go through the various sections of what's in this document as we go through the presentation. But this is a hard document for our residents to digest. So one of the best practices from GFOA is put together a more not comprehensive, but easier to read document for your residents so they can kind of absorb the basic concepts of the budget. And so this is the first year we put together a budget in brief, and that's also on our website. So we've pared 450 some pages down into about 6 pages. We use a lot of graphics, charts. We try to explain the concepts that may be a little bit difficult and easier to understand terms. So this is also available on our website, and we also have copies today. Okay, so why does this measure matter? It serves as a communication tool with the residents about the city's operating and capital budget. It's a concise document. It contains all the information about the city budgets, how decisions are made, for example, what revenue is generated, how many personnel do we have. It serves as one of the main communication tools we have in the budget office to communicate to our residents as well as employees about the budget. It promotes transparency in the budget process. We go over policies in here, why decisions are made, what policies we follow in developing the budget. It shows how we forecast revenue and expenditures, how much debt we have, for example, our property tax rates. And we talk about how the budget is put together and how residents can be involved in the process. It provides opportunities for us. We're always trying to make this better, a better document. Practices change, best practices may evolve, or GFOA may recommend additional best practices, so it's an opportunity for us to always make this better. And it allows for comparative analysis to other cities and towns. So we're not the only city that produces this document. Almost every municipality across the country will produce this. So if you're ever looking to do some type of analysis with a comparable city, maybe in another state that's maybe a college town, this is a really good document that they will provide this on their budget website. So we've gone out there to quite a number and just looked at how they put theirs together. But if you're trying to compare, let's say your department, the size of your department compared to a comparable city, and you're trying to figure out how many personnel do they have, what kind of revenue do they generate, this is a good source for you. Okay, so a little bit about the award. It was established in 1984 by GFOA. It's the highest form of recognition for the budget document. It has nationally recognized guidelines that they follow when they evaluate your document to determine if you qualify for the award. So there's 4 main categories, and I'll go over those as we go through this, with 27 specific criteria, and then 14 of those are mandatory. And so your document is evaluated by 3 reviewers. So GFOA sends it out to 3 reviewers, and they rate you on all these criteria, either not proficient, proficient, or outstanding. So the main categories, first of all, does it serve as a policy document? Do you talk about your organization's strategic goals and strategies? What priorities are important to your organization? So we're doing a really good job here at our city. We've adopted council 5 council priorities, and then what issues are influencing your budget. So what economic factors, maybe environmental, political, would be impacting the budget. And then do you provide an overview of the budget, high-level overview, so residents can have a good understanding of the basics of your budget. And then the second criteria is, does it serve as a financial plan? Do you explain the city's financial policies? So the council has adopted numerous financial policies, and we explain those policies and whether we're meeting those or not. Does the document describe the various funds in the city? So as a government organization, we use fund accounting. So you've probably heard of the various funds we may have, general fund, transit fund, for example. Do you describe those and describe the structure? Do you describe all your revenue sources? So we go through, there's a whole section that describes the revenue sources. Does it explain the budget process from beginning to end? So we're very thorough about explaining the calendar, when we start, where we end, and all the steps in the process. And then do you discuss the city's capital budget and then the debt that is used to finance a majority of that? And then the last 2 criteria is, outside of the budget, does it serve as an operation guide? Can someone go and see how the city is organized? So we put in an organizational chart in there. We also describe the departments, what the functions of those departments are, what services or programs are under each department. And then for us, what performance measures are attributable or assigned to each of those departments. And then lastly, does it serve as a communication device? Do you have statistics, graphs, charts that people can use to understand the budget? And then does it contain a glossary? So we're using the budget office to throwing out terms that we think are very common. But for a lot of our residents, when you say appropriation or encumbrances or roll forward, we try to make a good effort to explain what all those terms are. Okay, so to get the award, you had to be rated proficient or outstanding by at least 2 of the 3 reviewers in all 4 basic categories and 14 of the 27 criteria identified as mandatory. And they also have a special recognition award. You had to be rated outstanding by all 3 reviewers. And there's 2 special recognition areas, capital and performance measure. So there's not very many organizations that receive special recognition. We tried, and I think Adam was in the budget office when we tried to get special recognition in capital. We tried for a couple years, and we looked at other cities that had received special recognition in capital and tried to follow what they had done, but we're still trying. So. Okay, so our strategies to continue to receive this award. So GFOA, when you receive the award, they also give you feedback from the reviewers. So they may have rated you or proficient, but they may say, these are things that you as an organization, should improve to make it outstanding, or things that they notice. So we take that feedback and try to incorporate it into next year's budget document. And then GFOA updates their best practices periodically, and so we go back to make sure that we're meeting all of the best practices. Like I mentioned, we look at other municipalities to see what they're doing. So sometimes people are switching more to graphs or graphics in their documents. So maybe we'll shift from not a lot of text and move more towards like graphics. And then in the budget office, we have a concise work plan to make sure all those criteria are addressed before we submit the document.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Any questions about that? Special or distinguished questions? No? Okay. Well done, thank you.
I was going to say, the only other city that's tied with us is the city of Tucson in Arizona.
There you go.
Useless trivia.
Well, that's well done. Thank you. It is sort of an interesting situation, isn't it, that you've done something that's so unique, and yet you've done it for 32 consecutive years that it sometimes maybe gets lost in the repetition of excellence, just exactly how how significant an achievement that is for you and for your staff and for everyone who came before you who also worked so hard to get that level of distinction. It's, if for no other purpose than to have this be said in this manner, I think, to kind of highlight that for a group that doesn't necessarily, you know, kind of get the spotlight to the extent that perhaps is deserved, is a nice opportunity to do that. So thank you. All right, moving right along.
Okay, so let's move on to revenue forecasting. So measure 5.10, achieve revenue forecast actual variance for budget year of plus or minus 3% for local taxes and intergovernmental revenue. So that's a mouthful. So, but that is under strategic priority 5, financial stability and vitality. So when we say plus or minus variance in this measure, so what we're saying is, did the revenues that came in, were they over or under by above or below 3% versus what we had budgeted? So the actuals versus budget for both local taxes and intergovernmental revenue. Okay, so to build a little foundation here, so I mentioned 2 revenue sources that are in this measure, local taxes and intergovernmental revenue. So they make up 73% of the general fund revenue. And so this measure is really critical because even the slight variance can make a big difference when those 2 sources make up such a large chunk of our general fund revenue. Okay, so what is local taxes? So there's 2 things that we forecast. One is our transaction privilege, or probably more commonly known as the sales tax, and that's 1.2%. So if you go to a restaurant or a store and buy something, you spent $10, 12 cents of that's coming back to Tempe. So the budget for 1920 for local sales tax is $106 million. And then the other local tax that we forecast is transient lodging, or more commonly known as bed tax. So if you stay at a hotel or motel here in the city, you're also charged on top of the 1.2 a 5% tax. And that is budgeted for $8 million for 1920. All right, then we have the second category was intergovernmental revenue or state shared revenue. So in state statute, there's formulas that drive what portion of the state sales tax or state taxes that are collected that are shared with City of Tempe, and it's primarily based on population. So Tempe's share right now is about 3.3% of that pool of money. So the 3 taxes, they share more tax with us as far as like highway user revenue, but for the forecast purposes, that what we look at is state income tax. And so the amount that we receive, that pool of money, is what they collected from 2 years prior. So when you pay your state income tax, either through payroll deduction or at the end of the year, we're going to get a portion of that here in Tempe. And then there's state sales tax. So I mentioned the 1.2% that you pay when you buy something. There's also a state sales tax, and they collect that money and then share some of that back with the cities. And then when you register your vehicle, when your annual license, we get a % of that revenue also. Okay, so why do we have this measure? First of all, it's crucial for long-range planning. So next month, on the 14th, the Municipal Budget Office will be presenting the long-range forecast along with Ken, our Deputy City Manager, for all our major revenue funds. A key component of that is our revenue forecasting. And so as I mentioned, it makes up 73% of the general fund revenue. So the accuracy of this forecast provides assurances about the financial stability of the city and helps us anticipate challenges or opportunities based on the amount of revenue, additional revenue that came in. So maybe we can add programs or services, or if there's going to be a lack of revenue, how we can plan for that. It provides transparency about available revenue with our residents as well as staff. We want to be open about this is how much revenue we're forecasting and how much we anticipate to receive. And it's also GFOA, it's one of their best practices. That is a municipality or city that you would do forecasting. No more laughs? I thought that would. I told Lori they'll just laugh. I don't have to read that. So, yeah.
Okay, so first off, what is forecasting? Forecasting is basically part science and it's part art. The science part of it is all the historical data we collect, all the numbers we crunch, the statistical analysis we use. The art part of it is really knowing your economy, your community, what events are coming up, what events that are coming up that you have a reasonable certainty that will actually come to pass. So to phrase it another way, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. That's kind of the statistical part, because that's all based on what's happened before. We're using the past as a predictor of the future. However, by default, if you only use that, you're saying your assumption is nothing will ever change. And another thing that we know as a cliche is that change is the only constant. So you can't rely just on past information. You have to bring other aspects in there and modify it. Otherwise, the assumption that nothing will ever change, it isn't a bad one and it's not wrong. It's just not terribly robust. So why do we choose plus or minus 3% variance as a standard? To give you some background of what other people use out there, the average standard for both governmental and private organizations typically is plus or minus 5%. Another guideline that's out there in the industry is that if you're consistently getting plus or minus 10% or higher variance, it's time to reevaluate your forecasting methodology. We chose the plus or minus 3%. It's a slightly aggressive goal, but it's in line with our forecast philosophy of going for best estimate. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a couple slides. And the other thing that lends us to picking this plus or minus 3% is that our major revenues in Tempe are fairly stable. Our population's fairly stable. We're landlocked. So that means we can shoot for a little bit more accuracy because we don't have a lot of things that are going to cause variability, like lots of open land left for big developments or things like airports and speculative land sales. We're a little bit more limited in that area, but it also allows us to be a little more accurate. So the biggest question with forecasting is, how do you want to be wrong? Seriously. As soon as you publish that forecast, it is wrong. And there are different philosophies that organizations take towards forecasting. The first one I'm going to talk about is overestimating, and that's literally predicting that in most cases you'll bring in more money than you actually do. The drawbacks of this philosophy, if you will, is that you can many times end up with program and personnel cutbacks. And that can be pretty jarring, especially when you're talking about services and programs that a community counts on. So this is not a popular one for governmental organizations. I don't know of any actually that use this. The second philosophy or method is underestimating, and that's basically saying we never want to be over, we always want to get in a little bit more money than we predict we will. And it's a good philosophy, but then you get into the issues of deferred maintenance, deferring, creating new programs or adding to programs, and also if you're talking about hiring freezes and compensation freezes, you can get some turnover. So it works, but it sometimes can cost you. And then finally, you have the best estimate, or what they call the objective forecast philosophy. And this is the one where you're shooting to get as close to what's actually going to happen as possible without becoming a full-on psychic. But you do run the risk of being a little bit over, and you're willing to accept that risk. Now, what Tempe does is we go for best estimate, but if we can't hit the best estimate, we'd like to be on the conservative side. So this is a quick look at the numbers of how we're doing. So we've got the two different types of revenue streams that we're tracking over 5 years. So there's 10 data points up there. We're doing pretty decently on hitting our goals. One thing I would like to call out is local taxes for fiscal 17 and fiscal 18. You can see that those were out of range, and I'm going to talk about why that happened and what we learned from it in another couple slides. This is a quick graphical representation of those same data points because it's a little easier to see the performance. So our primary goal is plus or minus 3%. That's represented by the red and green lines. Out of those 10 data points, because we've got 2 revenue streams over 5 years, 60% of them are within the red and green lines. And then our secondary goal of trying to lean conservative, if we're not going to get within the red and green lines, 90% or 9 of our data points are above the black line. Now with forecasting methods, I'm going to go over some of the major ones that we use. The first is regression analysis. This one's a little bit complicated, so hopefully this analogy is going to work. It's a little bit like a pound cake. A pound cake, I know, a pound cake got its name because it takes a pound of sugar, pound of flour, pound of eggs, and a pound of butter. And if you increase any one of those ingredients, because all the other ingredients have a direct relation, if you go up to 1.5 pounds of flour, you now need 1.5 pounds of butter, 1.5 pounds of eggs, 1.5 pounds of sugar to go with it. Otherwise, you won't have the same cake. So what we're doing is taking our taxable activities and we're comparing them to another data stream. Typically, they're ones that we get from the University of Arizona's forecasting project. They're recognized as one of the best regional forecasters in the country. So they'll give us a forecast for total Arizona retail sales activity. And what we'll do is look at the historical and measure the relationship between what we've done for Tempe sales tax and what Arizona's sales taxes has occurred. And then we take their forecast and basically take that same formula and say, well, if Arizona sales tax is doing this, then we're reasonably certain this is where Tempe sales tax is going to go. So like I said, like a pound cake, you increase the flour, you got to increase all the other ingredients. We use this on 8 of our 13 taxable activities, the 8 largest, to give you an idea of what some of the largest are. That's retail sales taxes, rental, which is like on your apartments, your houses, and even on rental of small property like rug doctors and things like that, and also restaurants. So big surprise, bars and restaurants in Tempe. Our variables that we get from Eller are population for the state of Arizona, inflation for the western region, disposable income, employment by industry, and then also actual sales tax revenue forecast by industry. Some of the other methods we use are trend analysis. This is particularly useful for intergovernmental. The reason being is that the state of Arizona produces forecasts for what they think they're going to get as a total pool for the state income tax, state sales tax, and the vehicle license tax. And all we have to do is trend what our share is. So we just look at what's the share we've been consistently getting, is it going up or down, and we just adjust that percentage off of the forecasts they give us. Another method that is used in forecasting is one-time adjustments. So if we're reasonably certain something's going to happen, do we add it in? If we're reasonably certain something's ending, are we going to take it out? That helps prevent surprises where you thought you had something that was going to continue for forever and it turns out it doesn't, and now you're holding the short end of the stick. And finally, the last thing to understand about forecasting methodology is that the assumptions and the best knowledge you have available at the time is what drives the numbers. In a way, the numbers aren't even really that important. It's what did you assume and what did you know and what can you learn to do better next time. So I said I was going to talk about those 2 numbers for fiscal 17 and 18 where we're really out of our performance measure on local taxes. That was mainly due to Marina Heights. So we knew it was coming. We had gotten estimates on the amount of permit and plan review fees we were going to get. We had estimates on the construction activity. We thought we knew exactly what this puppy was. We thought we were set. And it turns out it was a lot less about State Farm just in and of itself. It was more like winning the best anchor you could ever think of for a mall. So putting a Nordstrom's in Fashion Square. All of a sudden, everybody wants to be there. So we went back and analyzed those 2 years, and 2/3 of the variance where we were short was all in construction activity that we didn't anticipate. So it was a halo effect that happened because of State Farm. Everybody wanted to be here. So our puppy turned out to be a little bit more like a unicorn. Now, unicorns are fairly rare. I hope we see another one, but you know, we may not. If we do, we'll have a better idea of how to handle it, and hopefully next time we can still hit our performance measure despite something like that happening. I'm going to turn it back over to Mark for the strategies. Oops, oh, I went backwards, sorry.
Okay, so what strategies have we adopted to ensure that we meet our target for this measure? So continued practice of presentation of the long-range forecast, and as significance to sound financial planning. So we'll continue to do forecasts twice a year. Like I mentioned, November 14th, and then we'll have one in February. Continued advocacy by our city's intergovernmental liaison, Marge Zilla, which I think I saw her here somewhere. There she is. To protect our state shared revenue. So sometimes the state, in order to balance their books, tries to monkey with the state shared revenue formulas. So she's on the lookout for that always for us. Continued participation in the University of Arizona's forecasting project. So we just don't want to rely on ourselves and our knowledge. We want to use outside information and knowledge sources. And then we thought of some additional strategies to incorporate, selecting forecasting methods that are most practical and accurate. I think we've done a good job of that. There are other methods that you could use, but there's a cost benefit to that. So we're a small staff, so we're going to use what's most practical and accurate. We want to analyze the data for bias. So Lori's done a good job of doing that, because when you start forecasting, you can kind of put your own bias in there. And so we adjust projections, seeing if we put some bias into our numbers. And then, as Lori mentioned, we want to, as we go forward, learn from what we've done in the past. So if there's lessons learned, we want to make sure we incorporate those into our forecasting. And like we said, continue partnerships with outside experts. So we rely not just on U of A, but as Lori mentioned, the state does their own forecasting. And so we look at those experts too about what they're seeing in the economy and in the future. That's
All right. Thank you. Questions, comments, pound cake recipes? No?
Did switching to the state collecting sales tax affect your models and the data you had available for forecasting?
I'm sorry, I heard you asking about the state.
Did having the state collect the sales tax revenue instead of going directly through us affect the data you had available for forecasting?
A little bit, yes. A couple things that are different, and forgive me, this might be diving off the deep end into minutia, but we used to track sales tax based on people's primary activity. So if you were a hotel, even though you had a restaurant, you were renting out convention center space, all of that got recorded under the hotel. Now the state actually reports it under each separate category where the taxable activity occurs. So that's changed our numbers a little bit. And then another technical detail is with audits. We used to take audits when we put them into our system and back them to the period where the activity occurred. We don't get that level of detail from the state, so it all just goes into the current period.
Hi, thanks for you two. When is the next downturn going to occur?
sometime in the future.
Yes.
Like we have another question.
So if you asked the city of Flagstaff, having NAU in their city helped them survive the economic recession, do you think we have the same relationship with ASU, given the fact that when there is a recession, more people go to school? Or is our economy too big to really feel that influx of students to help us out?
Well, basically, I mean, having them here and shopping definitely helps us. So that's one of the reasons why, even though we're fairly small residentially, we do quite well, because we have, what do they call it, daytime commuters, I think it is, or daytime population. When everybody comes into work, that helps us out quite a bit. And students are the same way, even though they stay here full time. The unique difference between them is in terms of what they're taxed on. So if you're an ASU student living in a dorm that's only for ASU students, and you're, I don't know if ASU does this, they did this at Purdue. They had dining halls run by the university. So if you're eating at the university-run dining hall, then, and you're not really going out and buying anything or doing anything, then we're seeing almost no revenue from you. But if you're eating at the Taco Bell in the student union, that gets taxed. If you're going off campus, going to restaurants, bars, shopping at Target, we get revenue for that. So it does help. It's just, it really depends on what the majority of the student body is doing.
So to follow up on that, Andrea and I have a real similar question, so I'll try to capture what we were both going to ask, and that is, as you forecast out, and we're aware of what happened with State Farm, what are you forecasting, or what do you see with the Novus property?
Oh, that,
How will we benefit financially from that? And do we anticipate, we know it's a 20-year build, we thought State Farm was going to be, I believe, a 5-year build or whatever it was. Do we anticipate, if the economy stays this way, that project coming in sooner and us being in a similar situation?
well, we typically wait until things are not set in stone, but really contractually obligated before we forecast them. Like State Farm was in the works for ages, and we only put it in probably, I think, a year before we started seeing revenue from it. Because we got the okay from community development, it was a done deal. Novus will happen, but we have to be very careful about when we start to rely on the money we think we're going to get. Because I mean, just look at, you know, Zarimba, West 6th, those big towers. You know, the economy tanked and they sat there vacant, half built for forever. So we can't, we try very hard to make sure that anything we're going to include is a really sure bet. So, because again, if we really go over, then we're looking at cutbacks, which, like I said, we're trying to maintain a very stable environment for the community. Does that answer the question, or? Okay, I'm sorry. Well, we're gonna put it in there as soon as we have more of an idea it's happening.
We're conservative.
Yeah. Well, on things like that, more. It's not so much we're conservatives as we try not to get overly speculative. So we don't.
You said contractually, are we not entered into a contract at this point?
Well, I think in terms of the money they're contributing per square foot to public safety.
No,
but,
not about public safety, but I'm asking, do we enter into an agreement, and is Novus not under development at this point? I guess I'm looking to my boss a little.
I think I'll try to answer that question. We have an agreement with ASU in the development of Novus as to the process that they have to follow when they are submitting for the building of any portion of it. That process deviates slightly from what we would normally do with development for a variety of reasons, and we have that agreement in place. What we don't have is, by such date, you shall build this tower or this development. We know the land, we know what their first phase is, because they're building it right now. We are told what their next phases will be, but again, a lot remains to be seen. Market conditions, you know, whether or not they have tenants, you know, the degree to which, you know, the local economy supports building certain things or not building certain things. So yes, we have an agreement with them as to the overall blueprint of what development and the process of approving development looks like, but we don't have any hard guarantees with them that they're going to build a specific building or a specific group of buildings at a certain time. But they have told us it's a 20-year window, which will have started, I guess, 3 or 4 years ago when they first announced it. So.
With the rate of development, I don't know what's going on. With the rate of development that we're seeing in the high density urban core development, how hard is it for you to reach that plus or minus 3% when it comes to forecasting? Because I feel like this is changing, I mean, so rapidly. How does that impact what you're trying to do forecasting wise?
Well, it doesn't make it easy, but it's just we're going to try to hit that regardless. And I guess sadly, the real lesson or the pulling back the curtain is we just try not to make the same mistake twice. You know, so if we get it wrong because we made a certain assumption one year, okay, correct that one, and next year you find out it's something else. So you try to get better at being wrong.
I think it's fascinating, and especially in a political environment when we talk about recession. So, are there any impacts similar to?
Yeah, yeah. Well, so far, it hasn't had a lot of impact, but I think it's something that kind of has a delayed, or I hate using this term, trickle-down effect. So you're going to see industries that are more directly tied or more directly impacted by the tariffs and trade wars and all that. They're going to start experiencing difficulty, and then it trickles down to their employees. There could be layoffs, there could be, compensation freezes, all sorts of things that would cause any of us, if we were in the same situation, our employer did that, we would start to get more conservative about what we're going to buy and what we're going to spend money on. So now basically your consumption of goods starts to decrease. But it is, like I said, it's nebulous. Predicting the timing is a little bit difficult because you don't know when you're going to hit that tipping point to where people are really going to start to feel uncertain and draw back on their purchases. So, and it also all depends on how long is it going to go on, because it has to continue to kind of get things to that tipping point. So it's something we're aware of. We wouldn't produce an overly enthusiastic forecast knowing this is going on, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to tank everything either.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you again. Great presentation. You added 1.5 pounds of eggs and sugar. Does it cease becoming a pound cake? And it's now a 1.5 pound cake?
I think so.
I hadn't really thought about that. That's interesting. Thank you again for your presentation. If you haven't already, please take the time to fill out the comment sheets that are provided for you. If you have additional comments and questions, you can pass along to the team. Our next Tempe Accelerates will be on November 14th, 2019. We will be discussing employee work-related needs and the culture of literacy and engagement. Hope to see you then. Thank you.
Send us your ideas and suggestions to tempeaccelerates@tempe.gov and visit us at tempe.gov/tempeaccelerates.